Hello and welcome to the Data Engineering Podcast, the show about modern data management. Are you bogged down by having to manually manage data access controls, repeatedly move and copy data, and create audit reports to prove compliance? How much time could you save if those tasks were automated across your cloud platforms? Immuta is an automated data governance solution that enables safe and easy data analytics in the cloud. Their comprehensive data-level security, auditing, and de-identification features eliminate the need for time-consuming manual processes, and their focus on data and compliance team collaboration empowers you to deliver quick and valuable data analytics on the most sensitive data to unlock the full potential of your cloud data platforms. Learn how they streamline and accelerate manual processes to help you derive real results from your data at dataengineeringpodcast.com/immuta, that's IMMUTA, and get a 14-day free trial. And when you're ready to build your next pipeline or want to test out the projects you hear about on the show, you'll need somewhere to deploy it, so check out our friends over at Linode. With their managed Kubernetes platform, it's now even easier to deploy and scale your workflows, or try out the latest Helm charts from tools like Pulsar, Pachyderm, and Dagster. With simple pricing, fast networking, object storage, and worldwide data centers, you've got everything you need to run a bulletproof data platform. Go to dataengineeringpodcast.com/Linode, that's LINODE, today and get a $60 credit to try out a Kubernetes cluster of your own. And don't forget to thank them for their continued support of this show. Your host is Tobias Macy, and today I'm interviewing DeVaris Brown and Ali Hamidi about Meroxa, a new platform as a service for data integration. So, DeVaris, can you start by introducing yourself?
Yeah, I'm DeVaris Brown. I am the CEO of Meroxa. I don't know what else to say, but yeah, that's the quick intro right now.
And Ali, how about yourself?
Yep, hi. Ali Hamidi, CTO and co-founder of Meroxa.
And DeVaris, do you remember how you first got involved in the area of data management?
So Ali and I, essentially, we worked at Heroku together, and we kept going on these like customer on-sites. And, at the end of the day, we kept hearing the same information over and over again, and where people were saying, our customers were telling us, it's great that we can provision our web app with the click of a button. It's also great that we can provision the database or Kafka cluster with the click of a button, but we also need you all to help orchestrate that. And so Ali and I kept hearing this probably 10, 15 times from some of the largest, most popular customers in the world. And we looked across each other, saw a twinkle in each other's eye. For me, it's more about solving problems for developers, and data is increasingly become more important to an organization. So that is how I got my start. Ali?
Yeah, so most of my career I've been much more focused on sort of the back-end engineering and sort of in and around data. And so before joining Heroku, I worked at a relatively small targeted advertising startup. And there it was all about managing sort of billions of social profiles and making use of that in real time. And so that was kind of the first intro into large-scale data management. And then obviously once I joined Heroku, I was on the Heroku data team, mainly focused on Heroku Kafka and some of the other data products. And as DeVaris mentioned, we attended all these customer meetings and kept hearing the same things. And that was kind of the motivation to start Meroxa.
And so digging more into that, can you give a bit of a description about what it is that you're building at Meroxa and what motivated you to turn that into a business and what it is that's keeping you engaged and interested to spend so much of your time and energy on it?
Yeah, the main thing is that after leaving Heroku and trying to pursue this idea, took a 3-month journey to understand more of the landscape. I'm a product manager by title. So for me, it was one of those things where, I knew we had the semblance of a great idea. Just wanted to know how pervasive this problem was. And so I talked to over 100 or so data engineers, data scientists, data analysts to understand what tools they were using, what they liked, what didn't they like, and where they were spending their time for their day. And essentially what we saw was that most of the people were spending their time on just manual grunt work, getting random data, disparate data components to integrate with each other. And so for me, if we could build a Heroku-like platform for real-time data, we could solve a huge problem for the masses, right? Like, take a look at the data ecosystem now, and it's just kind of like, all right, well, if I got a few $1 million in 6 months, I can, contract somebody out to build this thing for me. And we just thought, hey, this should be something that should be approachable for anybody, regardless of expertise and available resource. So For me, that's really the reason why we started to build this company. Ali can talk about kind of the underpinnings of it, but once we started with that premise, the architecture and the decisions that we had to make, it became more apparent and more clear.
Yeah, so essentially what Meroxa is a managed data platform. And so it's a tool or a suite of tools that allow engineering teams to easily transport data in real time between various data sources. And then we add sort of additional functionality on top of that, which is, enables you to do transformations and expose sort of various endpoints and better leverage that data that you have, and then kind of sort of tear down the silos and kind of enable flexibility in the data formatting.
You mentioned that you both came from Heroku, which is very well known for being an easy on-ramp for developers to be able to get something from idea into production without necessarily having to understand all of the pieces of launching and managing servers and keeping them up to date and well maintained. And I'm wondering what the lessons are that you learned from your time there that you are applying to what you're building at Meroxa and the way that you are thinking about what the user interfaces are and what the developer and end user experience should be.
Developer experience is something that, we still got to have purple blood running through our veins, right? And we want to make sure that that same type of experience applies to the data services ecosystem. And so some of the lessons that we learn, developers first, right? And so make sure that your developers are happy and it's easy for them to onboard. It's easy for them to grok the documents. It's easy for them to play around and quickly see the value of your platform. So internally, we say we measure our effectiveness in minutes, not months, right? And that's just more of a reflection of what the current state is, right? Where you have to take 3 to 6 months to get anything up on anybody else's platform. The other thing that, on the, experience side is that we want to be prescriptive, but give you control. And that's something that we learned at Heroku, right? Where a lot of people complained about Heroku was a black box and they didn't understand how certain things are done. But we've literally architected Meroxa to be open and adaptable and interoperable and transparent. And so that's something that, we believe that, for 80% of the people, Meroxa will work, out of the box for you. Great, right? Just point us at the data source. You'll get data flowing in real time. There's another 10% of the people that need to customize, for whatever their data usage scenarios are. So we provide you levers to tune and configure whatever it is that you need for your environment. And then lastly, we provide a very expressive CLI and API, right? And so anything that we do internally, say for like billing and some of the proprietary stuff, like we'll make available via the CLI or API. And so those are some of the things that I think we took away from Heroku that we definitely want to replicate, because obviously Heroku's, regardless of who you are, I think like everybody at some point, probably 9 out of 10 engineers have done a project on Heroku at some point, and we want to do that for the data services ecosystem.
From my point of view, sort of the main learnings that we're bringing over, apart from sort of the value of DevX, which I think is super significant. Being on the Heroku data team in particular, the Heroku data team managed millions of databases for tens of thousands of customers. At one point, the team was only 8 engineers. And so the key learnings there is really the focus on solid automation. Obviously, at that scale, you can't manually do anything on anybody's databases. And so there was a definite focus on really sophisticated and resilient automation. And so that's sort of something that I'm taking, with me and bringing it into Meroxa and being able to build out these sort of very effective automation tools for dealing with operations related to, various data pipeline components and that kind of thing.
And in terms of the product that you're building right now, what are your initial target users and how are you using that persona and those particular needs as guiding principles for designing the overall interface to the platform and the capabilities that you want to be able to provide at launch?
Yeah, I mean, right now we're squarely focused on data engineers and data aware engineers. Our persona is that person that, you might be at a seed-stage startup and you're just about to hire a data engineer, you're thinking about it. We want to be, basically position ourselves as like, hey, you don't need to go pay this person ungodly sums of money to do this job, where they're going to basically be stitching together data components for the next like 3 to 6 months. And so that's really who we're going after. We're targeting bottoms up because there are a ton of people, ton of companies in the enterprise realm that are, the Confluence, StreamSets, Nextlas, all that type of stuff, Ascend. But nobody really has the ability to be truly self-serve. And so that's really where, our wedge is that, we don't take a lot of time for people to get connected and to get data flowing through our systems. And so that's why we're decidedly going smaller. And we want to basically, enable, like I said before, everybody, regardless of expertise and resource, to be able to have this like high grade enterprise level production data infrastructure at their disposal. And I think that's really, our competitive advantage and really what is going to differentiate us from any of the aforementioned companies that I talked about.
In terms of like guiding principles, I think there are a few that DeVaris and I sort of settled on pretty early on in the creation of Meroxa. And so being able to focus on providing this sort of incredible developer experience, but not necessarily taking away control, that's kind of a key part of it. So providing that flexibility, allowing customers to really configure and fine tune the components for their use. No vendor lock-in. This is sort of a key part of gaining sort of credibility and trust from users. We use open components in the sense of the APIs and standards that we adhere to. We sort of believe that customer data is customers' data. And so always allowing customers to access it, no proprietary formats or anything like that. And then essentially committing to support and contribute to open source. And so I'm sure we'll get into architecture a little bit more, but essentially we have product split into two parts. And the part that exists in the customer's sort of network boundary is entirely open source. So every component is either already open source or will be open source by us. And so those are sort of things that we committed to.
And by committing to those open standards and open APIs, are there any constraints that is imposing in terms of how you're approaching the product, where it might have been easier or faster to get something functional if you either built something in-house from scratch or you were able to customize the interface in terms of being able to optimize for your particular deployment environment, or any other limitations that puts on you that would maybe make your life easier, but in the end will not necessarily foster long-term adoption?
Yeah, there are quite a few areas, like that. In particular, one of the areas that we sort of had this issue with is, underneath the hood, we leverage Kafka and Kafka Connect and the Kafka ecosystem. So we leverage Kafka Connect quite heavily. And there are certain limitations related to Kafka that, impose some additional burden on us. And, if we're committed to supporting open source, that's something we want to continue to use. So our solution was I guess, ultimately the obvious one, which was build something that addresses the need better, but also open source it. And so we've kind of skirted around the subject of, having to make that decision because we just did the thing that we needed to build. We built the thing that we needed to build, and then ultimately, plan to open source it as well.
As far as the challenges that engineers typically face in being able to build and maintain data infrastructure, what are some of the common challenges that you came across in your conversations with the folks that you were doing the on-sites with and with the initial people that you are talking to as you build out and iterate on the Meroxa product?
One thing that we found, which was pretty common, is there's either a sort of a clear divide between the teams that are responsible for data infrastructure and the teams that are building applications. That's kind of the integration point where you want to take data that's being generated by a particular application, transform it in some way, and expose it to other applications. And so you're kind of crossing these team boundaries. Then you have a difference in expertise. If you're using Kafka, for example, many software engineers that are building backends and APIs are very familiar with relational databases, but not so much with sort of streaming data paradigms and different semantics related to streaming and events. And then similarly, people who are building data pipelines aren't necessarily that concerned with sort of common practices and limitations imposed by people building APIs and applications. And so that was kind of a clear divide where there's often some friction. And that's kind of the area where we try to smooth things over and provide tooling to kind of address that particular obstacle. Another area is just complexity in general. If you're building something using a suite of open source tools, you have Airflow, you maybe have some Python scripts, you might have some Spark jobs running to do some transformation. Your sort of the complexity of the infrastructure and the pipeline grows massively. As you introduce more data sources and inevitably companies, as they grow, start introducing new data sources, new types of data. You have databases that are optimized for particular use cases, whether it's a graph or time series. And so you have this sort of combinatorial explosion of complexity where you're trying to get data from, n types of databases into n types of targets. And you need to be experts in everything in order to do it effectively. That just becomes a difficult task to kind of rein in.
To the point of data sources and data targets, are there any particular sort of common systems that you are targeting initially to be able to help scope your work that you think will be most widely beneficial? And how are you thinking about the types of data sources and data targets that you want to be able to support out of the box versus just providing a means of somebody being able to pipe into a standard interface and then have the Meroxa platform take over the rest?
The thing that we realized was your data is already in your database, right? And it's sitting in a format where it's not being heavily used or leveraged because, if I write a, select star from orders or select star from users command, I'm essentially just getting the end result of many different actions, right? And so what we realize is that by doing change data capture and streaming, a lot of the data that, gets piped into other systems, like if I use a segment or rudder stack or, in particle or something like that, essentially like I'm instrumenting those events. But, I have to take a huge amount of time to go do that. So we basically realized that, look, if we can do change data capture from your relational or NoSQL data stores, we can essentially get all of that granularity that you're getting with event-based systems without you having to go re-instrument your app. And so out of the box, we support the typical kind of relational and NoSQL data stores as sources of data, and then API endpoints as well. And then for the sinks or the destinations, we support, the major cloud platforms and things like that. And so that's where we're at now, right? Like we want to basically be able to get your data from your production data store in real time, and then being able to give you the flexibility to multiplex that data stream into, whatever destinations that you may need. But that's where we're at today. And then in the future, we'll look at different SaaS platforms and things like that, like Salesforce and Zendesk and, some of the Stripe and Shopify and some of the more popular ones. But we'll never be at a point where we're going to, have, like Ali mentioned, that combinatorial explosion of we have the Facebook ads connector to Salesforce connector, right? We don't want to get into that playground. Because I swear, man, it's like, we have an internal competition Slack channel. It's like literally every other day there's some new company that gets funded for, we can take data from your thousands of SaaS applications into thousands of destinations, right? And it's like, that's not really where we see the competitive advantage or how people actually really want and need to work.
Yeah, our focus has really been to pick the connectors where we can add the most value. So the ones that are the hardest to implement well, the ones that are the most complex or least reliable or whatever the biggest obstacle is, the biggest challenge. And that's where we kind of focused our energy on in order to make it very, very easy and very efficient. And so if you look at the first few connectors that we've launched, CDC for Postgres, MySQL, MongoDB, we do it in a way that's fairly transparent to the end user. And so as a customer, they can point the Meroxa platform at Postgres, and we figure out the best way to get data out of it, whether it's through logical replication and Debezium or some other mechanism, or degrading all the way down into like a polling interface. That's where we can add a ton of value because we make it so easy and seamless. And so, like DeVaris said, we're not sort of interested in getting into that sort of connector arms race where you're just churning out a massive library of connectors. I think for the APIs that are relatively easy, if you're just hitting a REST API and pulling strings or JSON values out, then we don't really add that much value anyway, in which case, you're welcome to use one of our standard API sort of endpoints. But in the areas where we can really add a ton of value, that's where we want to focus our energy on.
Digging a bit more into the Meroxa platform itself, you've mentioned the capability of being able to pull data from sources into destinations using things like Kafka Connect and change data capture. But I understand, too, that you also help with being able to manage things like administrative issues, such as upgrading a particular destination store from version A to version B, and being able to just make sure that the operations aspects of managing the data platform don't necessarily have to bubble up to the end user, and they don't have to be an expert in all of the systems that they're interacting with in order to be able to reap their benefit. So I'm wondering if you can dig a bit more into what capabilities you're building into Meroxa in its entirety.
Sure. So I kind of alluded to earlier, Meroxa exists as two separate sort of key parts. One being the control plane, which is proprietary and will remain proprietary. That's core IP. And essentially that's the orchestration component. And so that's the part that reaches out into customers' infrastructure or into the data plane and pulls all the strings and hits all the APIs and sort of steers the infrastructure. And so part of that is monitoring the different components and managing it from sort of a operations point of view. And so it could be things like updating versions. It could be things like addressing and remediating common problems. Perhaps your disk volumes run out of space, so it could potentially automatically expand the volumes. It could restart services if they get into a state where they aren't responding. It could restart underlying instances. It could do a number of things. And sort of essentially the control plane has a framework for automating resolutions and remediations. And so over time, as we gain expertise and gain experience in more common problems related to different sort of data components, then we'd build out a library of remediations and the control plane will kick in and fix things there. Beyond that, the data plane itself, which consists of Kafka, Kafka Connect, and a number of other supporting components, the control plane also manages that. And so we look at the state of the health of each connector, the state that it's in, throughput, metrics, all those sort of aspects, and figure out what to do in certain cases, whether it's, we need to scale up, whether we need to change a configuration to optimize performance and other parts of it. And so, essentially the product is split into two parts, the control plane, which is the managed aspect, and then the data plane, which is a collection of open source tools. Either they're existing ones like Kafka and Kafka Connect, or they're tools that we're writing that we will open source in terms of a Kafka proxy and some other things that we also include.
Today's episode of the Data Engineering Podcast is sponsored by Datadog, a SaaS-based monitoring and analytics platform for cloud-scale infrastructure, applications, logs, and more. Datadog uses machine learning-based algorithms to detect errors and anomalies across your entire stack, which reduces the time it takes to detect and address outages and helps promote collaboration between data engineering, operations, and the rest of the company. Go to dataengineeringpodcast.com/Datadog today to start your free 14-day trial. And if you start a trial and install Datadog's agent, they'll send you a free t-shirt. And as far as the architecture of the platform, how are you approaching this problem space in order to be able to make it scalable and maintainable for you and your team, as well as accessible to end users who don't necessarily have all of the expertise of how the different systems interact and how to integrate them effectively together, and they just want to be able to pull their data out of their Postgres database and land it into a data warehouse and write some SQL against it?
So currently we have two different deployment modes, targeting slightly different customer sort of personas and use cases. The first one is sort of the shared model, where a customer comes to the platform, they swipe a credit card, and all of the data pipelining infrastructure runs within our account, within our infrastructure. And so at that point, they introduce their Postgres database, they tell us where it is, our control plane reaches out, analyzes it, it figures out what we can do with it. And then at that point, through the APIs or the CLIs, they can instruct the platform to retrieve the data and put it into a different data source, and we automatically provision all of the data pipelines. The second deploy mode, which is more targeted towards customers with more sophisticated requirements, whether they're related to compliance or security or maybe performance and scale. Essentially, our platform can drill into a customer's account and deploy the data plane within their network boundary. And that's super appealing for a number of reasons. In terms of security, the data never leaves the customer's network boundary. All of the transformations, the transport between the sources and the sinks all occurs within the network boundary. And so that helps them, maintain whatever regulatory compliance they had, or potentially achieve regulatory compliance based on their needs. And it also means that scaling is sort of within their control. So if they're a larger customer that may have negotiated discounts with AWS, then they can continue to leverage those, because as their usage scales, we spin up more resources within their account and they benefit from those volume discounts and whatever they've negotiated. And so we're much more aligned with what the customer needs in terms of scaling at that point. And our control plane sort of reaches from the outside and sort of controls and manages the data plane there.
I'll be a little more controversial than Ali, right? Like, this is really what the difference between us and pretty much everybody else on the market is, right? Like, take a look at any of the ETL tools and all that type of stuff. Like, everybody stores their data in S3, and especially during this time of increased privacy and data protections, right? Like, that becomes a huge, especially if somebody has a misconfigured bucket, right? Like, that's a huge potential for liability there. And so for us, we have the advantage of being able to deploy, if you're cloud native, being able to deploy inside of your network boundary and not using any of the data that flows through our system. We can operate off of the shape of the data, but we don't necessarily need to see the bits and bytes. And I think that's something that, for us, it's a big advantage. And that's what a lot of people are seeing. The interesting thing is, like, a lot of our nearest competitors or people that are kind of playing in this space, they always use Kafka as like a rate limiter or throttler, right? But they're really missing out on the full power of what Kafka can do outside of that. And they just basically just dump everything into S3. And then, I can point a data warehouse like Redshift or BigQuery, Redshift or Snowflake towards those things. And then basically, like, you get data warehousing for free at that point. All right. And so for us, it's just kind of like, well, what if you wanted to do more with that data? What if I wanted to create an API, or what if I wanted to do, real-time search indexing or any of that type of stuff? Like, I wouldn't be able to do that basically using S3 as a launching point. I would have to write some jobs that do some pre-aggregation and then put that into a data mart and then point all of these services at that data mart. And you're basically just wasting weeks and months of time. The stream has all of that information available. And so that's really where we see the advantage. And that's why we're making a bet on the architecture that we have.
Going into this particular problem space and looking to build Meroxa, what were some of the initial assumptions that you had based on your existing experience and the conversations that you had with your customers at Heroku, and how have they been challenged or updated as you have continued down the road of building this product and working with some of your initial customers?
I think the main thing for us is that we see that our assumptions were right. Ali, has there been any scenario where we've just been like, yo, we need to do something completely different? I can't think of one.
Yeah, I think we came into it fairly well prepared for what we were getting ourselves into. There's one area where I think our assumptions were not entirely wrong, but maybe we had higher expectations than what the reality was. And that was in the area of the quality of Kafka connectors. The perception I think the community has, and we definitely, we fell for this too, is there's the belief that there is this massive collection of really high quality, expertly tested, used in production by large companies. And the reality of it is very different. There's a small number of really, really excellent open source projects, Debezium being one of them, super solid Kafka Connect connector. And then there is a very long tail of assorted other connectors for other data sources and data syncs that vary drastically in quality. I think that's kind of what you'd expect from open source tooling in general. I think the perception of Kafka Connect and Kafka Connect connectors is that the open source system is filled with these amazing connectors and they all work great, and that's what you should be using. I think perhaps that may have been the case before Confluent changed their licensing and sort of change the licensing on some of their own built connectors. And so maybe those are rock solid and totally solve everybody's problem easily. But unfortunately, the licensing sort of prevents us from providing that as a product. And it also prevents other customers from using them for similar reasons.
And so as far as the next steps for somebody who gets started with Meroxa, what are the capabilities as far as being able to expand outside of the Meroxa platform and bring in some of the enhancements or new capabilities with them?
Eventually, so right now we're all CLI and API, and that's mostly focused on the data engineer and data aware engineer. But as we move up the value chain, we'll enable, data analysts, data scientists to create pipelines and manage pipelines and do transformations and write functions and all that type of stuff from a UI, from a visual perspective. In addition to more connectors and, like those types of things, like we really see that as the kind of next stage of our journey that's going to be able to provide the most value. And the real reason like we kind of came up with this is that, we kind of look at this as a journey of a few acts, right? And so the first part of it is building the real-time data catalog. So we enable the data engineers to build this catalog and, with all the permissions and, all the stuff that they need. So now they can integrate components super easily, right? And manage and scale them extremely easily. Once you have that catalog, now from a UI perspective, if I'm a data analyst or data scientist, what we've heard before in the past was like it would take anywhere from, a couple hours to a couple months for them, a data analyst or data scientist to get a pipeline built, all right? And so because we can operate on the shape of the data, we can provide that mocking and staging aspect to the data scientists or data analysts before they actually push this up to production. So you can drag and drop, create your pipelines, and then select fields and tables and fields that you need. And then, you can click, a button essentially that says go to production. And it basically just sends a request out to the data engineer that's managing the infrastructure. Ali is selecting these tables. He wants access to this, yay or nay. And then it can go to production. So the data engineer technically doesn't have to do any work anymore. And so even in our research, we saw that if we can provide the ability for data engineers or data aware engineers to quickly integrate things and then, self-service, we can solve 80 to 90% of their workday. So now they can actually get down to, doing things that add value, feature support and all that type of stuff. So that's really kind of the, near future as to what we're going to be tackling.
I think when it comes to integration with other sort of tooling, because we strongly adhere to the idea that we should use open standards and existing APIs, we're sort of well suited for integration with other tools. And so if you already use DBT on your data warehouse, then our goal is not to displace that. We can do some transformation on our side, but it's kind of a different focus. And so yeah, absolutely use that. And I think that's very complementary. Similarly, if you use Materialize, you want to generate real-time materialized views, that's something that you can totally use and you can integrate directly with the data pipelines that have been provisioned via Meroxa. And so our goal is really to create these partnerships and add value by integrating with these other tools rather than necessarily displacing everyone. That's not really our goal. And our commitment to open source also means that we can be used in components can be used in other products. And similarly, that opens us to pull in other open source tools to improve the platform as well. And so we're very much for the idea of ephemeralization. And if there is a tool that works better than something that we've built, then by all means we should stop wasting our resources and our energy on something and use the better thing. And that sort of frees up our resources and our energy and our time to focus on areas where we can add more value.
Yeah, I always say we're system engineer first, software engineer second, right? And that just comes with maturity, right? I think the big thing that Ali and I realized, and maybe this was it seared in us from Heroku, is that look, we just want to build the right things and not have to build everything, right? And so the reason why it took us 2 months to get something of this sophistication going is that, number one, not to discredit the absolute sheer skill of and expertise of Ali, but all those years of experience, he knows what to grab in his tool bag to get the job done versus now we need to go write an event streaming platform or event streaming framework and all this other stuff, right? Those are some of the mistakes that I see, people that are less mature doing because now they have resource and time to go do this thing. Our main thing is, you asked about what are the things that we learned from Heroku is it's always put the customer first and to make sure that they're the most productive. Because if they're productive and they can clearly see value in your platform very quickly, then they're going to be customers of yours for years to come. Even if, there's outages or price changes or any of that type of stuff, they're still going to be able to see the value. And I think us having that DNA kind of within a shared DNA between us, that kind of gives us the ability to know hey, this is where we need to go, absolutely go build something from scratch versus, look, we can just, kind of augment whatever it is that's out there.
I think that core focus on open source and open standards and the extensibility of the platform is definitely something that is worth calling out again as a viable business strategy to make sure that you are capable of taking the long-term view and being able to adapt as the surrounding ecosystem continues to evolve and mature. Because, if you built Meroxa 10 years ago, maybe your core focus would have been integrating with Hadoop and its ecosystem, whereas now in most conversations, that's an afterthought or not even a consideration, where that had been the be-all and end-all of being able to do large-scale data integration. So it's definitely worthwhile to take a look at what are the foundational principles, what are the core elements that are necessary, and then being able to swap everything out using shared interfaces.
I think you totally called it. That's really, a key consideration for us is rather than the shiny new, hot sort of product, it's really where can we add value? Where's the challenge right now? And that's where we want to focus.
From the people who you have worked with so far, are there any particularly interesting or unexpected or notable ways that they've been able to use the Meroxa platform, or ways that they've been able to spend the time that they've regained from not having to manage the underlying infrastructure?
I would say the main thing is that everybody initially uses us for the same use case, right? Which is, we usually get people saying like, oh, we want to do change data capture to our data warehouse, right? And they're basically looking to us to be the real-time replacement for, Stitch or Fivetran or something like that, right? And then once they realize like, holy crap, that was so easy, a caveman can do it. Then they're like, wait, can this data stream be used to be pointed somewhere else? And we're like, yeah, what do you got? And so, now for some of the people, like we're doing real-time search indexing, right? Because we can point that stream to their Algolia or Elastic endpoint that does indexing, right? Or we can basically take the same stream and then point it to a API endpoint. So we auto-generate RESTful or gRPC or GraphQL API endpoints based off of that stream of data. Right. And they're like, oh, well, now I'm basically using this to do, kind of internal dashboards or basically like in-app, whatever, analytics, real-time analytics or something like that. And so undoubtedly, basically, it becomes this like moment of discovery or moment of clarity that all of our, design partners have had, which is, man, that same stream can be used in multiplex into multiple destinations. And that's really what the power of Meroxa is. I mean, it kind of goes back to an earlier point that I think was kind of made, but kind of glossed over, is that what we realize, and what Ali always says is like, we're the like unified data backbone of an organization, is that traditionally, analytics and engineering operations have been separate, right? Like I have my analytics stack. It's usually some like commercial SaaS product that allows me to do, kind of some consumer data platform, right? Or customer data platform, right? That has a bunch of connectors. And that, that's usually what my, sales folks and marketing folks and those kind of folks use to do their job. But then on the engineering side, you have another tool set, which is usually either some like, if you're in an enterprise, it's some off-the-shelf enterprise solution that's super clunky and the experience is bad. Or, you have an army of data engineers that goes out and kind of stitches together things from open source. And, the two stacks, analytics and operations, are largely separate, to be honest. And it's really, painstakingly difficult to integrate the two. And so, that's really what's been our advantage, is that to do engineering or analytical operations or BI analytics is literally the same tool set. That's the moment of discovery that pretty much every one of our design partners has had.
Yeah, our big bet has been that if we take data from all of these various silos and put them into a flexible sort of event stream, then that will enable a broader range of use cases and enable a lot more value, or enable customers to get a lot more value out of the data. And so typically, as a side effect of them trying to solve this particular use case, a relational database into data warehouse, we introduced this concept of the unified data backbone, where we kind of expose this stream of data, and now they can leverage it for other things. And that's been the case with almost everyone. It's this organic growth of, well, now I have it in this flexible format, I can do all these other things with it. And that's essentially the big bet that we've made is that, let's get the data into this event stream and then use that as a launching point for building new applications, enabling new use cases, and addressing the existing range of use cases as well.
Yeah, I mean, from the same stream, you can do API generation, you can do disaster recovery backups, right? And then you can ship that off to a data warehouse, right? And so like your IT organization, your engineering organization, your analysts can all be made productive from the same exact stream of information without any changes to their app. And they're getting all this information in real time. And so like that's the power of this unified platform that we have.
For somebody who is considering Meroxa, what are the cases where it's the wrong choice?
Never. Come on, man. Our internal joke is like, yo, just sprinkle some Meroxa on it and everything will be much better. But I would just say, like, from a technical standpoint, there is no real reason why somebody shouldn't be able to use Meroxa. All right. Where it gets the nuance or the devil's in the details is like, because we don't have, our security compliance certifications like ISO and SOC 2 Type 2 and those types of things, right? Like we're not a great fit for heavily regulated industries. But if somebody's willing to, deploy Meroxa's data plane inside of their network boundary, that's a way that we can get around that. Ali might have different opinions, but I don't think, as a salesman, I don't think that there's a scenario that we can't tackle.
Yeah, I think like DeVaris mentioned, anything that's regulated, that's something we don't address very well right now, but that's obviously something that we're working on. Another area where we currently don't really have a great fit is if you have very, very sophisticated sort of data pipelines or like a very elaborate DAG where your data is being transformed in 50 different steps before it lands somewhere. The platform alone isn't really well suited for that. Similarly, if you have very elaborate sort of stream processing requirements where you want to do some very sophisticated like windowed aggregation with some transformation and that kind of stuff, currently we don't address that very well. We have future projects to address the stream processing use case with functions and be able to do more sophisticated stream processing. But right now, we don't natively support anything like that. That being said, because we use open standards, you can integrate like KSQL on your side or Kafka streams or Spark or whatever you want and tap directly into that Kafka stream if that's what you want. But on the platform alone, that's not something that we do right now. And so maybe if your requirements are very much focused on that, then we're probably not the best choice right now.
Yeah. But the other part of that too is like we said, we play nice in the sandbox. And so it's one of those things where if you got an Airflow cluster or something like that, like we can point our stream towards that, right? And like you don't necessarily have to create or provision, rip and replace any of your existing infrastructure, right? And like that's another one of our product tenets, right? Is to be interoperable, and we want to make sure that regardless of what data infrastructure you have in place or what data components you have in place, we want to make sure that Meroxa is present for at least some of that. We don't have to be everything, but there are places where we provide more value than others. And if you see that, hey, I need, this complex DAG, you can drop in Elemental or Airflow or Prefect or something like that in between and, and then output your stream to something else, right? Like that's something that we're more than able and equipped to do.
And are there any particularly interesting or unexpected or challenging lessons that you've learned in the process of building Meroxa, whether from the technical or the business and sales perspective?
Oh, man. I'll talk about the business and sales side, right? So even though everybody has this like fallacy that product managers are the CEO of the organization, I'm going to tell you right now, being a product manager does not prepare you for being a CEO of a startup. Right. And, it's just all the little things. I mean, it gives you a good framework for understanding, for having empathy and going and tackling problems. And so, which is good. But at the end of the day, right, like there isn't a playbook for going out, knowing how to go sell and knowing how to like close people and like all that type of stuff as a product manager, because it's just not something that we have to do. And so, all of the assumptions that we had initially, just iterate on those over time as far as like our ideal customer profile and, what our go-to-market strategy should be and like all that type of stuff. And just being a product manager has helped me understand like what I have at my disposal. But at the end of the day, there's no substitute for just getting out there and trying and failing or getting out there trying to succeed and all that type of stuff. So from a business and sales side, I mean, there's just a lot that, we just didn't know. And even from a company formation side, right? Like there's just so much that you just take for granted. Even if you're early at an organization, or I've basically been the Ali for a bunch of startups, right? Been the first CTO or first technical hire. And it's just like things that you just don't get privy to when you're not having to deal with it day to day. So if anybody is going to listen to this, the first piece of advice I could tell you is find you a great lawyer. That is the cheat code amongst all cheat codes. And we were fortunate for us to get one after some things happened, but lawyers make all of the difference. After that, I mean, everything is, pretty much just trial and error.
Work at Heroku and having exposure to millions of databases and, a huge number of customers meant that I was exposed to lots of, bizarre usage and weird edge cases, but that doesn't ever stop. So even, with Meroxa, as soon as we start getting customer traffic, there's always there are always new and sort of unique problems with data and data quality and data corruption and things that you believe to be entirely impossible happen. And as you scale and you get more data, more customers, more usage, those small, very, very unlikely events happen all the time. And so that's continually surprising. And I think that's something that will never really stop. But the other thing which I wanted to kind of talk about is much more on the business side is that these are highly unusual times, I think, in general. And it has made every aspect different. So hiring is really bizarre because, there's like no in-person meetings, there's no in-person interviews. Even, meeting with VCs has been weirder. I think every aspect of the business and business formation and just getting set up has been very odd because of the current times. And the way people are thinking about when we talk about hiring, the opinions of people and sort of the comfort levels of moving to a new company, potentially a startup, is definitely influenced by, what's going on right now. And I think people are mostly sort of hunkering down and trying not to make any drastic life changes. And so that's made hiring a little bit more challenging. But, the flip side of that is remote is, everyone is remote. And so us being a remote first company means that, everyone is a potential new hire because, everyone is accepting of remote. And so it's been a very unusual experience, obviously with many downsides and many upsides as well.
For people who are interested in Meroxa and want to get started with it, what are the options for being able to experiment and test it out? And what do you have planned for the future in terms of new capabilities or a general release schedule?
Yeah, so right now we're behind private beta. So if you're interested in using Meroxa, just email us. You can just do support@meroxa.com. And somebody will help you out there. Like we're basically white gloving people onto the platform. Our platform will be available for self-service, I would say mid to late November, just in time for the holidays. And I think that's really what our, general availability will be. I mean, essentially be a public beta at that point. It'll have significant amount of polish on that, and it'll have the UI experience. And then in the future, we're going to be open sourcing, like Ali said, some of our data plane components. And so right now we are creating a Kafka Connect replacement in Golang. And I'll let Ali talk about why and what the motivations behind that showed, because it's really just kind of an outcry from our customers and what we've seen as far as like usage and things like that. In the future, essentially, we're going to be moving towards moving up the value chain. And so creating experiences for, people that are not pro coders, right? Like how can we enable the masses to, develop departmental apps or, those types of things for that leverage real-time data and that real-time data catalog, but do it in a low code, no code way. And so that's, down the line, but like, that's really what, kind of what the playbook looks like for us.
Yeah, aside from sort of that functionality and moving up the the stack in terms of technical abilities. Stream processing is another super interesting area that we plan to tackle at some point, as well as potentially creating a Terraform provider so that we can sort of fit nicely within existing sort of infrastructure as code sort of pipelines and usage. Going back to the Kafka Connect replacement, we've seen customers struggle with deploying Kafka Connect and adding those connectors, as well as building connectors. Kafka Connect is written in Java and runs on the JVM, and that comes with a certain amount of sort of resource usage. And so there is a good argument for writing an equivalent product in a much more resource efficient language. And so that allows you to pack connectors much more tightly. And that makes sense for us as a managed service provider because we deal with the long tail, large number of customers. The tighter we can pack the connectors onto an instance, the better the financials work for us. Even as an open source user of this product, less resource usage means lower costs for me. We see Go as being, heavily adopted and well supported language. And so if we can make it very, very easy to write connectors in Go, I think that's a net win for the community in general. And the idea is, being able to maybe relax some of the constraints that Kafka and Kafka Connect impose and potentially build a better user experience, integrate a nice sort of feature-rich UI, expose some better ergonomics around transformations, and sort of those kinds of things. It gives us an opportunity to build a better experience in general and provide something to the community that obviously we can use, but also adds immediate value.
Yeah, I definitely look forward to seeing that because I have heard a number of conversations about some of the challenges with Kafka Connect. For the most important question, where does the name come from?
That's a very good question. And most people think it's just something that's made up, but everything with Meroxa has a purpose. So me and Ali came from Salesforce/Heroku, and at Salesforce, they used to say all the time, data's the new oil. And so one night I was up watching Nat Geo, probably Wicked Tuna or something like that. And then next show came on and they were talking about the Dangote pipeline that's getting built in Nigeria. It's going to be one of the largest, refineries in the world. And one of their byproducts is kerosene. And then the way that you remove impurities or sulfates from kerosene, which is jet fuel, is the Meroxa process. So, kind of our unofficial tagline is if data's the new oil, we want to power the refinery. And so that's where the name Meroxa comes from. I tried to go Meroxa.com, IO, AI, all that was taken. So I just added an A to the end of it. But that's the origin of the name and what it means.
It's a good backstory. Are there any other aspects of the work that you're doing at Meroxa or the overall space of data integration and data platforms that we didn't discuss that you'd like to cover before we close out the show?
One thing which I kind of wanted to highlight is, our vision for Meroxa is really to grow into a complete data platform in the sense that, we hope someday we'll be able to address all data needs related to a business. And so right now we're starting with the area where we think there's the biggest opportunity or there's sort of the weakest existing product. And so for us to, build something to address that space. But yeah, our vision is really to become a complete data platform where you can provision, manage, operate, create pipelines, address real-time use cases, and pretty much do anything you want to do related to data.
We got to be careful because we got founders on our cap table. We're not trying to get into the data visualization game by any means. I love those guys, so I'm not trying to encroach on their territory. But the interesting thing is, they will even tell you themselves, the reason why they were so successful in the early stages of Looker is that they had a huge forward deployed engineering organization. Right. And basically they would just put an engineer on site at their largest customers to do anything and everything to get data into a format that Looker can consume. And so, they'll tell you themselves hey, if we had to start Looker over from the beginning, it will look a lot more like Meroxa than it did, does Looker. Right. And so that's really, kind of a feather in our cap because we realize that to build any type of house, you have to have a good foundation. And, for us, we've taken a pragmatic approach. But we feel once we have this foundation in a pretty stable state, that enables us to go and play in, many different verticals, many different use cases, and we'll undoubtedly be extremely successful.
For anybody who does want to get in touch and follow along with the work that you're doing, I'll have you each add your preferred contact information to the show notes. And as a final question, I'd like to get your perspective on what you see as being the biggest gap in the tooling or technology that's available for data management today.
Ooh, man, there's so much. I would say biggest gap that I see is, I don't know if I should say it, man, because that's really what our secret sauce is. Ali, how you feel about that?
Say whatever you want.
For us is that we realize the biggest gap is like there isn't a component gap. It's the experience gap, right? And like that's the biggest thing that people just don't understand is that, especially in the data realm, people are less likely to be all in on one vendor. And so interoperability and adaptability is at a premium. Unfortunately, folks just really haven't focused on developer experience. And so for us, it's just like, the combination of real time, right? Like, change data capture into real time, being able to do real time stream processing, and then being able to, have this like managed real time infrastructure. You can take any one of those components, and there's probably like 20 companies that are well funded that are doing those single things. I haven't even talked about like data governance and security and like all that type of stuff, like things that are already built into our platform. There's companies that do single, point things of that very, very well, but they don't do all of those things together very well. And I think that's really what the advantage that we have is. It's like people think that we're probably boiling the ocean, but, we see this as a platform play. And that's really where the biggest advantage is for us, I think.
I think the overall experience is clearly that's, what we're doing. And that's why we exist. But the other area, which I think is a pretty big gap right now, is data hygiene or data quality. Data pipelines tend to be super brittle, and a big part of that is because of the data quality itself. And it's hard to trace back the quality of the data or the source of the data corruption and kind of unthread that and address it. And so there's definitely a big area for someone to come in and build a really good tool around that and make it really, really easy to track and track data corruption and detect it and kind of provide data uniformity and data hygiene. I think that's definitely an area that we're super interested in, and I'd love for us to tackle in a good way. But I think right now, I see that as kind of the biggest weakness in sort of data engineering in general, is data quality is just generally a problem.
Inside of our data plane, man, like what are the things that we've done to, essentially kind of mitigate, at least even in the early stages, against like bad data quality? Can you talk about like the schema changes in the schema registry and all that type of stuff?
The platform includes a schema registry by default, and we update the schema registry based on events that we see, and we kind of keep track of that. But there's an even deeper problem. Like the schema registry and that kind of tooling only addresses schema changes. But what I think is the weakness right now is where your schema hasn't changed, not intentionally. We've seen this actually. A particular field is an integer, and for some reason there's a string because the upstream database is MongoDB and it doesn't enforce data types per record. And so that breaks the pipeline, and it's hard to get around that. Essentially you're expecting one thing and you get something else. And so it's not really a schema change because it wasn't intentional, and it just happens to be one record out of 10 billion that has this problem. But having tooling around, being able to detect that, put it to the side, enable a UI, provide a UI that shows the customer like, hey, we found something that is unexpected. What do you want to do with this? Do you want to correct it? Carry out surgery on the record? Do you want to drop it? Do you want to flag it? Do you want to do something? Basically having that tooling around, picking out, a needle in a haystack and seeing like, oh, this is not what I expected. Let me fix it and put it back in. I think there's definitely an opportunity there to build something better.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing that, we talked about this like self-feeding system. I don't want to go around and start throwing out buzzwords like AI and ML, but as you can quickly see, like, if these things continuously happen, we can feed that into a model, and then that model will be able to be widely available and widely used to say like, hey, we saw this thing, we can immediately take some remediation steps and notify you as to what has happened. And then like, nothing looks different to you other than your data going to the destination in the format that you needed and the speed that you needed. Those are the types of things that we can do because we control the ingest, and then we can control where it's going to be placed at. And then using an intermediate format like Kafka, that gives us the ability to do things like, replays and all that type of stuff once we do find, anomalous events like that, right? Like, everything that we've done has been extremely intentional because we're, providing, like I said, the foundation for us to do some really, 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 really cool things down in the future.
Well, I appreciate you both taking the time today to join me and discuss the work that you've been doing so far and the visions that you have for it. It's definitely a very interesting platform and one that serves a very big need in the overall data ecosystem. So I appreciate all of the time and effort you've put into that and the work that you're doing to contribute back to the community. So thank you both for all of that, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tobias, for giving us opportunity on your podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Listening. Don't forget to check out our other show, podcast.init, at pythonpodcast.com to learn about the Python language, its community, and the innovative ways it is being used. And visit the site at dataengineeringpodcast.com to subscribe to the show, sign up for the mailing list, and read the show notes. If you've learned something or tried out a project from the show, then tell us about it. Email hosts at dataengineeringpodcast.com with your story. And to help other people find the show, please leave a review on iTunes and tell your friends and coworkers.